Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and a new Outlaw Rogue build has dropped just a few days ago. I'm not the one who made it, I'm not the one that found it. That credit goes to the Rogue Discord as well as Solo for initially posting about the build, and I'm not even sure who came up with it to begin with, but a new build has creeped up for the spec of Outlaw Rogue, an ambush build that's making a big return for Season 2, offering competitive damage to keep it rolling builds, the roll the bones builds that not everybody can get into, that is actually getting some competitive numbers against those, and even better output with the Mythic Plus dungeons in particular. Previously, I've been running my dungeons in massive trash pools, and even though I was target capped to 8 targets, with the Keep It Rolling build, I got about a 5 million burst window. But with this build, you can reach up to 10 million and even more, depending on your gear, depending on your items. But this build definitely pumps out far more damage than I've ever seen before. It has a lot more consistency, fantastic single target damage, and to boot, it's even easier to play. You will need the 4-set bonus in order to get this build online, but as soon as you get your tier pieces, then you can finally play a very powerful and a very easy to pick up version of Outlaw Rogue for Season 2, and this might be my favorite build so far in this update. So let's dive into the guide, which you can also find the written version of on our Discord channel. As always, if you guys want to see more guides for the patch 11.1 Season 2 content, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in. So this new build is, I guess it's not really new. It really brings back to what Rogue started off with back during like expansion of Dragonflight, I believe, with ambush being a priority playstyle, and it's making a bit of a return as of right now. This build is actually, in my opinion, just a little bit easier to play than Keep It Rolling, and in some cases, in some situations, it's actually a little bit less punishing too. So as part of the build, we are going to be mostly sticking with the same class challenge tree that we've been playing with for quite a bit of time, with Supercharger being one of the core talents that we heavily invest into, with Double Vanish as well as a deeper strat. But we are going to be going back to Hidden Opportunity, the HO build, which means that Ambush is back up on our bars that we'll try to use as regularly as possible. This changes the way we use Vanish a little bit too, using it a little bit more aggressively rather than to maintain as many finishers as we can. We still do it for the same purpose, but we now get a little bit more output every time we Vanish, because Ambushes hit a lot harder than Sinister Strikes and Pistol Shots, or comparable to Pistol Shots if anything. We also get random procs of Ambushes through Audacity, which means we can use Pistol Shot a lot more aggressively, as whenever we use Pistol Shot, there's a chance we just get a proc of Ambush. Ambush works like Sinister Strike, so you can double hit to proc you Pistol Shot. So a lot of the times we'll be going through rotational changes where we'll Ambush, Pistol, Ambush, Pistol, barely hitting Sinister Strike, generating a ton of calm points in a long haul. Now, for this build, you do have to play Trickster. There is a natural synergy between Trickster, Ambushes, and Pistol Shots. One, because of Surprising Strikes, as it allows us to get more critical strike damage on our calm point builders, which means that Outlaw with this build has a little bit of crit scaling. This is new for the spec, technically makes stats like crit better. Not something we heavily invest into, but it does give us a little bit extra movement potential in that regard. Also, because we are playing Trickster, we have to play Killing Spree as it's part of the build's synergy. Some of you are already not going to enjoy this build because of Killing Spree, just because it has a very unique functionality within PvE content. In PvP, it's a fine ability. In PvE, however, the random positionals that it could offer sometimes could put you in really bad spots. It looks like they fixed those positionals of Kill Spree for some of these bosses to be in a very specific spot, especially on Gallowix, for instance. So there's even less likelihood of you just getting hit by a random frontal. So at least they're trying to work on it, but hopefully they'll do some additional optimization for this ability so we can have a bit better control, like a 0.5 update or a 0.7 update or something like that. Even though this is a risky ability, it is still quite powerful and can be an incredibly good defensive option in content like Mythic Plus. In the Mythic Plus variation of this build, I do pick up the Blind and AoE, so Airborne Irritant is a fantastic tool, definitely worth grabbing. I do prefer Elusiveness over Cheat Death, as it is better for pushing some of the higher end keys and allows you to defend against so many abilities and dot effects that it's almost a mandatory option. In the AoE department, we do pick up Dancing Steel to have a little bit more cleave capability. However, you could optimize this build a little bit more if you take a point out of Count the Odds into Precise Cuts, because you won't really need additional Roll the Bones procs from Count the Odds. It is nice, but it is a viable alternative, so you can have better quality cleave damage within multiple mobs, or within few mobs rather. Like in boss fights like the first boss of Theater of Pain, there's a lot of cleave capability there. In some of the smaller pulls you'll do past the first one with Cinderbrew, there's actually a lot of cleave capability there. Anytime you're fighting only a handful of mobs, less than 7, you get more damage on that cleave, making it more potent. And there's actually quite a few dungeons where you will go for smaller pulls because you have to, and that's where Outlaw can shine. However, if you're someone who doesn't like Ghost Strike as an ability, maybe you don't want to use it in AoE on single target in Mythic Plus, you actually can do a slightly different switcheroo here. Switch out Ghost Strike for precise cuts. You will lose some single target damage, but you lose a keybind that you no longer have to worry about, while gaining significant bit of AoE and still getting random buffs from Count the Odds, which is an alternative way of how you can adjust this build if you don't like certain parts of the gameplay. You don't have that much of a DPS loss, and you gain a little bit more of convenience of not having to press an extra mandatory button where you have to manage the energy. Like, some players don't really enjoy Ghost Strike at all, so this is a viable change that you can adjust in this build. Let's talk about another crucial component that will make this build function, and this is necessary in order to get this build online, and that is your tier set. You do need to have the 4 set available in order to make this build viable, because the 4 set allows us Roll the Bones to have a higher chance to grant us 2 buff and a 5 buff combo. This combined together with a talent like Sleight of Hand also adds those chances together, given our 2 buff chance of like a 64% chance to roll 2 buffs, and given 5 buffs a chance of like what, 17% or so, around that number. And we're basically with this build trying to fish for that 5 buff the whole time. We're using Roll the Bones on cooldown to get a lot of value out of the talent of Supercharger, which empowers all of our finishers, grants us more comp points. This helps us in more damage, but also in better cooldown reduction, so we can get our cooldowns back online a lot quicker. And when that fast comp points this build builds up, that means you're gonna have Roll the Bones backup available a lot more often, so you want to fish for that 5 buff. You have Killing Spree backup more often, Vanishes backup more often, Adrenaline Rush backup more often. So it's actually better to use Roll the Bones as almost like a primer ability to buff our finishers for a few moments. The only time we stop rolling the bones with this build specifically is when we get a 5 buff combo. So we basically go fishing as this build. It does simplify the rotational aspects of Roll the Bones and the minutiae and the details of which buff do I keep, which buff do I drop, and rather you just keep rolling until you have 5 buffs. And while you do that, you're also greatly amplifying your finishers, giving you a massive cooldown reduction and significant damage increases. Plus, with the tier set, Roll the Bones, the more buffs you roll, the more damage you also buff up towards your dispatch, which also adds another layer of overall damage output. Now, as for the actual rotational playstyle of this build, we're basically going to be swapping out what is normally Sinister Strike with ambushes for the most part. And the only big rotational priority you'll have to watch out for is Ambush becomes an ability that's high in priority. The highest priority ability above Pistol Shot, which is the second priority ability. And there's only a handful of situations where Pistol takes over Ambush. Like if you're low on energy, like below 70%, perfectly fine to send a Pistol Shot while letting your energy recoup. This build, if you play it correctly, you won't have any energy issues whatsoever. Another reason why you'd want to use Pistol Shot over Ambush is if you have 6 stacks of opportunity, which allows you for a ton of comp points when you use a Pistol Shot, and the buff for Broadside is active. This means a single Pistol Shot will just give you full max comp points to send into a finisher, which is just more valuable that way. And just banking on a bunch of procs of opportunity isn't worth it. So when both of those buffs are active, this way Pistol Shot would be prioritized. Otherwise, you ambush as often as possible, only using Sinister Strikes when nothing else is available, and then sending Ghost Strikes on cooldown whenever possible as like a filler for the extra comp points, but trying to keep it up as best as you can. As for the finishers with this build, we will prioritize Killing Spree over Subterfuge Windows and Adrenaline Rush to some degree. You don't want Adrenaline Rush to fall off, so Killing Spree becomes a secondary finisher if you need to dive into Vanish, which is where you're usually spamming between the eyes as part of the Crackshot rotation, but in most cases, try to use Killing Spree as often as possible. From there, Between the Eyes should be used in Stealth, in Subterfuge, but also can be used on cooldown as ambush builds specifically because of that chance that it'll refund you back comp points. Because of that aspect, it just ends up being slightly better in that regard. Otherwise, Dispatch counts as coup de grace too. Coup de grace does not, for now, have a priority above like Between the Eyes or Killing Spree. Technically, you should use it before a Killing Spree, but in a lot of the sims that are ran, it doesn't get used immediately. It actually takes like such a backseat It's not even funny. Slice and Dice should be maintained passively just by using Dispatch or Between the Eyes during Crack Shot. The only other change you want to make with this build, because you build so many comp points, is usually you send finishers at 6 comp points, or 5 if you're in Subterfuge, or Procsec Audacity, or Opportunities are active. It's actually a lot better for you to go back into building comp points instead of spending quality comp points. So kind of like quantity over quality, because we just generate so many comp points so quickly. As for cooldowns, the only cooldown we really need to adjust here is how we use Roll the Bones. Instead of waiting for specific buffs or when you get a certain combo, you just stop rolling. You're basically constantly rolling on cooldown as early as possible. Whether you're in Subterfuge, whether you're doing anything else, you literally just want to put this ability on cooldown when it's available, unless you have 5 buffs active. Getting value from the Force set and the Supercharger is a lot more impactful and a much higher priority than anything else that you could do on this build, and if you could use that roll before a finisher, that's even better. However, if let's say you have a bunch of random passive procs of buffs from Count the Odds, which can generate your Roll the Bones buffs for a handful of seconds, if you have enough of them to make a 5 buff, all those buffs still count as part of the Roll the Bones buff, even if they're available for a few seconds. When you have 5 active, you don't roll, you delay it and only roll once you lose them, or once you have less than 5 buffs, in order to get more value out of Supercharger. As for the gearing aspects, this build is not going to be as haste heavy as Keep It Rolling. You do want some haste because we're not running talents that give us more energy. We're not picking up things like Vigor, or we're not picking up Thistlety, so we are going to be a little bit energy starved. We don't want as much haste as a Keep It Rolling build, but we want a little bit of it, so you're not really going to be at the 18 or 20% haste, but pretty close. You gotta sim your character to really find out if haste is a good stat for you, but generally haste is a great stat, so any gear with haste versatility is going to be a pretty big bonus. Otherwise, this build wants a lot of versatility. The more versatility you can have natively, the merrier. So that is going to be your priority stat to get as much as possible. Crit scaling is a thing, but crit is going to be a stat that, of course, you'll need to sim. Once you have enough haste in order to manage your energy, then critical strike and versatility become much better of 2 stats. And finally, mastery is still your worst stat. Technically, with this build, mastery is the best that it can be, though it's still not worth investing into. Because of abilities that have like multiple hits in a few globals like Killing Spree and Coup de Grace, you technically are going to notice yourself proccing more mastery hits, though it's still, as of right now, not really worth stacking. But if, let's say, you play someone, like maybe somebody who plays mostly Assassination Rogue or Subtlety, and you invest heavily into the stat of Mastery, but you wanted to give Outlaw Rogue a try. Even though you have high amounts of Mastery, while not ideal as a stat, you could make it work just because of the way that this build plays. And if you really wanted to give this build a try in things like Mythic Plus Dungeons, or maybe try some of the bosses within the raids just to mix things up a little, you won't see the worst damage output. You definitely won't get the best output, because you're probably running too low of haste to really have much energy to run this thing optimally. But even having a little bit of mastery, even though it's not ideal, it isn't not the greatest, but it's a little bit more of an okay stat this time around. Now, I do want to hit it up with some pros and cons of this build after giving it a proper shot on a stream and trying to do some dungeons, but also doing raids with it. I found that this build simplifies the Roll Bones rotation immensely. You no longer have to worry about which buff you have or which buff you gotta keep or which buffs you gotta drop. You just keep rolling until you get a 5 buff. And every time you roll, you just amp up the rest of your finishers, which makes it so much more simple to play this spec of Outlaw Rogue, as the Roll the Bones mechanic is a minutia that not everybody enjoys, especially if you don't play Outlaw Rogue or find it to your taste. And the RNG is something that really does keep a lot of players away. So this kind of throws that RNG out of the window. So, and you either are buffing the damage of your finishes while Roll the Bones, or are rolling a godly 5 buff that allows you just to slam at the boss. Whether you get a 5 buff or whether you just keep rolling, either way, it is a damage gain as the spec of Rogue because of the way that Supercharger works, as well as the tier set, which makes it super good. Also, ambush playstyle I think is a bit more consistent. Like, even if you have, let's say you're playing a Keep It Rolling build and you get really bad set of buffs back to back, yeah, you're not really going to get a lot of good damage. And if you can't really get a good ramp up with a good Roll the Bones, you really feel like your damage isn't going to go anywhere unless you get super lucky on your next few rolls. With this build, it's roll independent, and ambushes, as well as the damage of your finishers and Killing Spree, all do more consistent damage than it would be with a Keep It Rolling, which really needs a good buff combo in order to really take off. As this build, even if you don't get a lot of good buffs or really a lot of luck, ambushes, dispatches, between the eyes, and killing sprees all give you at least consistent damage that's going to give you more even numbers pull to pull. This build also hits kind of hard, like the burst capabilities you have during Vanish Window also feels really good. And this build actually does a lot of damage in AoE content. A pull like Cinderbrew, which has a lot of uncapped AoE potential at the beginning with Outlaw being a 7-target cap spec, I was surprised I was hitting for like 10 million burst damage at the very beginning of that pull. Normally, I peak at 5 million, and that is my numbers for average throughout the entire dungeon, at least when it comes to using the best of the best gear from the PTR testing, but going into live realms with the gear that I have, which is definitely not the best of the best out here, and then hitting for about 10 million spike in the opener on the uncap, but it could only affect 7 targets, was insanely good. It just proves just how strong this build can be with full burst. And getting about a 4 million for the overall on the Cinderbrew also felt good as well, and this number is only going to get better as I get more gear on this character. This build overall felt surprisingly good and a lot more consistent within Raid, since it simplifies some of the aspects. The combo point building and spending is incredible. I don't have to really think too hard about using pistol shots or synergy strikes at the right time with Keep It Rolling. I just slam ambushes and pistols whenever they're glowing on my bars because they're available, and then I use finishers as soon as possible. And honestly, as I've been making guides for rogues this expansion so far, rogue is a very complex class compared to some of the other alts that I play. And there's already a lot going on, so playing a build that's a little bit more simplified and streamlined, it is such a nice break mentally. And I imagine it's a lot more approachable for newer players that don't normally frequent Rogue because it's kind of difficult, but also for veteran players that have been playing Rogue for quite a bit of time. So some of you are not going to enjoy this build, one, because it's an ambush playstyle. Not everybody's going to be a fan of it. Some people enjoy Keep It Rolling and Thunder Strikes, and that's perfectly okay. Even though ambushes are pretty good right now, I definitely would give it another try if you played it before. It feels really good to play in comparison, but some of you may not enjoy it, and that's perfectly okay. This build also plays into Killing Spree, which you have to play as Trickster, which is another aspect where some of you are probably not going to be a fan of. Killing Spree is a button that you really do need to know how to use properly. Some fights, you can't just send it on cooldown. Even though you should try to, you will have to hang back with it and then send it a little bit later because it can sometimes put you in a really tough and deadly situation. So managing the use of Killing Spree is going to be of utmost importance for this build, because that is essentially the only button that can really get you into hot water. But outside of that, I found this build to be a very refreshing take on Outlaw Rogue, especially as the ambush playstyle, which I haven't really frequented in quite a bit of time, outside of PvP, of course, where it still remains to be the go-to build for most players. Not all, however. Some do play Keep It Rolling with Thunder Strike, which is just still a bit wild to me. But this is a very fun playstyle, and if you've tried out the Rogue, haven't really enjoyed the Roll the Bones or Keep It Rolling, I would give this one a go again as this ambush playstyle, as it's easier to gear for, a little bit easier to play, and as soon as you get tier set, the whole Roll the Bones mechanic is just streamlined and a lot easier to pick up. But with that being said, as always, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys did enjoy this video. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give it a like. I would very much appreciate it. Join our Discord community if you got any questions regarding this build, and we'll have an updated version of the Outlaw guide for Season 2 with these build, with the talents, which you can also find in the description of this video. But definitely frequent our Discord channel in order to find the written version for this ambush guide. As always, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.